The day began like any other hiking trip. Sarah, a seasoned adventurer, had convinced her friends to join her on a remote mountain trail that promised breathtaking views and solitude. As they ascended higher into the wilderness, the world below disappeared, replaced by thick forests and rocky terrain. The first day passed without incident. They set up camp near a clear, icy stream, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The hikers gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter under the vast, starry sky. However, as night fell, a strange unease settled over the group. The wind howled through the trees, creating eerie melodies that sent shivers down their spines. Sarah dismissed it as normal mountain sounds, but deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. Morning arrived, and they resumed their journey, determined to reach the summit. The trail became increasingly treacherous, and the forest grew denser. The once cheerful chatter of the group had now given way to hushed whispers. It was during a rest stop that they made the chilling discovery. Emily, one of their companions, had vanished without a trace. Panic set in as they searched frantically, calling out her name into the silence that surrounded them. The disappearance was inexplicable. There were no signs of struggle, no footsteps leading away from the campsite. It was as though Emily had been plucked from the group by an unseen force. Now, fear gripped their hearts. They realized they were not alone on this mountain. There was something out there, lurking in the shadows, and it had taken one of their own. As the remaining hikers continued their ascent, their sense of dread deepened. The mountain seemed to conspire against them, with twisted trees and jagged rocks forming an otherworldly labyrinth. The once clear trail had vanished, leaving them lost and disoriented. Desperation took hold as night fell again. They huddled together, the only comfort coming from the flickering campfire. The wind whispered strange, unintelligible words, and the darkness pressed in from all sides. Sarah knew that they were being hunted, that there was no escape from whatever malevolent presence lurked in the mountain's depths. The hike that had promised adventure had become a nightmarish descent into terror, and the worst was yet to come. The next morning brought no relief. Another member of the group had disappeared during the night, leaving behind only a torn backpack and a sense of dread that threatened to suffocate them all. Their rations were running low, and the remaining hikers were physically and mentally exhausted. Sarah took charge, her survival instincts kicking in. She led the group in a different direction, hoping to find their way back to civilization. But the mountain seemed determined to keep them trapped. The trees closed in around them, the forest growing denser with each step. Unearthly sounds echoed through the woods, whispers, laughter, and faint haunting cries that seemed to come from all directions at once. As days turned into a terrifying blur, they encountered strange symbols carved into trees and rocks, symbols that seemed to shift and change when they looked away. The symbols appeared to lead them deeper into the mountain, into the heart of the unknown. And then there were the eyes, glowing, malevolent eyes that watched them from the darkness, always just out of sight. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded, that some unseen force was guiding them deeper into the nightmare. Their numbers dwindled further, and the survivors were plagued by feverish nightmares, each more disturbing than the last. They shared tales of apparitions and shadowy figures that lurked just beyond the edge of the firelight. With every passing day, the mountain revealed more of its sinister secrets, and the hikers were left with a chilling realization. They were not alone on this mountain, and whatever dwelled here had no intention of letting them leave. As the group pressed on, their dwindling numbers filled with a growing sense of dread. They began to encounter strange signs. Unusual tracks appeared in the soil, unlike any creature they could identify. The prints were unsettlingly large, with long, sharp claws that suggested a predator of horrifying proportions. One fateful night, as they huddled around their dwindling campfire, a spine-chilling howl pierced the stillness of the mountain. It was unlike any animal sound they had ever heard. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that whatever hunted them was not human, nor any known animal from the natural world. They took turns keeping watch, their nerves frayed by the constant feeling of being watched. It was during one of these night vigils that one of the hikers glimpsed a shadowy figure moving among the trees. It moved with unnatural speed and grace, vanishing into the darkness before they could react. Their terror escalated as they encountered more evidence of the creature's presence. Trees were snapped like twigs, and the remains of animals were found, torn apart with brutal efficiency. The air was thick with a rancid, otherworldly scent that left them gagging. The survivors were now consumed by paranoia, suspecting one another of being the creature's accomplice. Whispers of curses and hexes filled the air as their mental states deteriorated, and trust among them eroded. They were trapped in a relentless nightmare, pursued by an unknown entity, and the mountain itself seemed to conspire against their escape. The terrain became increasingly treacherous, as if the very landscape itself had become a malevolent force. As they ventured deeper into the mountain's heart, their encounters with the creature became more frequent, more harrowing. Each time it appeared, it seemed to toy with them, vanishing into the shadows just before they could confront it. The group had become prisoners in a relentless, surreal horror, and they had no choice but to continue their nightmarish descent into the unknown, hoping against hope to uncover the truth behind the enigmatic creature that haunted their every step. As the days turned into an endless nightmare, the survivors' physical and mental states deteriorated further. Sleepless nights and relentless fear took their toll. They had reached a point where distinguishing reality from hallucination became an impossible task. The creature's relentless pursuit grew bolder, making brief, terrifying appearances at the edge of their campfire's feeble light. It seemed to feed on their terror, its eyes gleaming with malevolence as it watched their every move. Desperation drove them to set traps, but the creature was unnaturally cunning, avoiding their snares and luring them deeper into the mountain's labyrinthine depths. It left cryptic symbols behind, etched into rocks and trees, symbols that seemed to mock their futile attempts at escape. The once close-knit group had now fractured, suspicion and paranoia tearing at the bonds of friendship. Accusations flew, and they turned on one another, convinced that someone among them was conspiring with the creature. Each night brought more disappearances, leaving behind only the echoes of their terrified screams. Sarah, now a shadow of her former self, was plagued by guilt and responsibility. She had led her friends into this nightmare, and their suffering weighed heavily on her conscience. But she couldn't give in to despair. She had to find a way out, a way to confront the unknown horror that stalked them. It was during one particularly harrowing encounter with the creature that Sarah noticed a pattern. It seemed to avoid a certain area of the mountain, a place shrouded in an eerie silence. With her dwindling group in tow, she led them toward this strange sanctuary, hoping it held the key to their salvation. As they approached, the silence grew more profound, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. It was here, within this silent void, that they discovered an ancient, weathered stone altar adorned with bizarre symbols. The eerie silence seemed to repel the creature, which retreated into the darkness, its hateful eyes fixed on them from a distance. This discovery filled them with a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the altar held the power to protect them, to repel the creature, and bring an end to their nightmare. But to unlock its secrets, they would need to delve deeper into the mountain's dark history, a history intertwined with an unspeakable evil that had haunted these slopes for centuries. As the survivors examined the mysterious altar and the strange symbols adorning it, they realized that it was a key to unlocking the mountain's dark secrets. Through their combined efforts, they deciphered the ancient markings, revealing an incantation that, according to legend, could banish the malevolent force that had tormented them. With newfound determination, they performed the ritual, their voices trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy, and a strange luminance enveloped the altar. For a moment, they believed they had succeeded, that the nightmare was finally coming to an end. But then, as the ritual reached its climax, the unexpected twist occurred. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the mountain itself seemed to come alive. The altar's eerie glow intensified, casting eerie shadows on the terrified faces of the survivors. Suddenly, from the very earth they stood upon, a colossal, nightmarish creature emerged. It was a guardian, an ancient being tasked with protecting the mountain's secrets. The creature, far more powerful and terrifying than the one that had stalked them, was awakened by the ritual. The survivors' hopes were dashed as they realized that they had unwittingly unleashed a far greater evil. The guardian, enraged by their intrusion, set its wrath upon them. It was a battle for survival like none they had ever faced, pitting human resilience against an ancient, otherworldly force. In a desperate struggle, the survivors fought to defend themselves against the Guardian's relentless onslaught. The mountain itself seemed to aid their adversary, its terrain shifting and twisting to hinder their escape. As the battle raged on, the survivors began to understand the true nature of the mountain. It was a place where ancient powers and dark forces converged, and their attempts to meddle with its secrets had consequences beyond their comprehension. In a shocking twist of fate, the surviving members of the group were left with a choice: to confront the malevolent guardian head-on, or to make a risky escape and leave the mountain's mysteries behind forever. But one thing was clear: they could never forget the horrors they had witnessed on that accursed peak and the price they had paid for their curiosity. And so, their fate hung in the balance as they prepared for a final, cataclysmic showdown with the Guardian, their lives forever intertwined with the haunting mysteries of the mountain. Thomas could hear the loud church bells in the distance ring throughout the village. He quickly looked through his dresser, trying to find something. A look of panic painted his face as beads of sweat dripped off his brow. He tossed clothes left and right from each drawer until a look of relief came over him. Pulling his hand out of the back of the drawer, he held an old revolver. The silver embellishments blackened from years without use. He slammed the drawer shut and grabbed a bag that was laying against the door to the bedroom. He could see people running by from the broken window. Quickly, he made his way to his front door and swung it open. It was dusk, the whole village covered in a deep gray light as the sky was filled with clouds. The bells had not rung on any day other than Sunday in quite some time. Everyone knew what it meant if it rang during the week. People were running all over the place, frantically trying to get to the church. The winter air was harsh against his skin. Snow covered the grounds thick and freezing. Swinging the bag over his shoulder with his gun in hand, Thomas began running in the direction of the bells. The church was in the center of the village, which was nowhere near where he lived. He had lived near the edge of it for quite some time. Lightning lit up the sky as he looked up. He could see the figures now, just above the clouds. Large wings flapped throughout the sky. He didn't have much time. It had started a few years ago. The majority of the colony was taken out by them in a bloodbath. It had happened once every few months since the first time. They would appear right at dusk, coming with the storms. Thomas had been at the church the first time they came, praying with his colleagues after a long week of working in the fields. They had been giving thanks for the large harvest they had sown right before the winter months came. However, Thomas and all of them remained safe, as they soon realized that the creatures could not enter the church. One of the creatures had let out a deafening screech before flying through one of the stained glass windows of the church. It was most likely an accident, as the creature fell immediately to the ground. It lay on the ground, writhing in agony, as its gray skin began to sink in and blister. Smoke came off its body as it began to disintegrate right in front of the group's eyes. Thomas remembered the event vividly, and it always remained burned inside of his mind. Since then, the church remained a safe haven for the villagers. Whenever the storms that carried those horrendous creatures approached, the bells of the church would ring out, signaling everyone that they were coming. For the most part, it helped, but the creatures proved to be way too fast for some of them. With each arrival, more and more of the villagers would be slaughtered or taken away, their fate unknown. Thomas ran faster as his lungs began to burn. It was then he heard a blood-curdling scream coming from behind him. He looked back to see that in the far distance, one of the creatures had swooped down from the sky and landed on the ground. The woman that was running stopped in her tracks as she stared at the creature in horror. The massive thing reached out its long claws and grabbed her by the waist. It lifted her up while she struggled and screamed even louder than before. In one swift motion, it brought the woman close to its large head and opened its massive jaws. Biting off her head, her body fell limp as blood sprayed from the gnarled stump where her head used to be. The creature swallowed it down in one massive gulp. It then proceeded to throw the woman's lifeless body to the side like a discarded rag doll. One after another, more of them descended from the sky. Thomas turned back and continued running towards the bells. More horrid screams filled the air, from both men and women. He didn't want to think whether or not any of the screams he heard came from the small children of the village. There had to be at least 30 of them now. Some as tall as the cottages, others the size of a large wolf. He passed by the corpse of a man who was beheaded as well on the ground. Two of the smaller creatures were tearing into the corpse's stomach, swallowing chunk of the bloodied meat. He struggled not to vomit as he continued to run faster. Thomas could see it then. Off in the distance, the large church stood tall and bright. Another one of the creatures flew down and landed on the roof of a cottage to his right. It was only about 20 feet away from him. He turned his face and inadvertently made direct eye contact with the beast. Its face was horrendous, with large black eyes and rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth lining its mouth. It let out a bellowing roar, and Thomas's blood ran cold. The creature leaped into the air once more and flew over to him. Thomas ducked at the last second, barely escaping the creature's grasp as it landed on a man not too far from him. The man screamed as the creature roared in his face. The stranger's face had a look of pure terror, knowing that his fate had ultimately been sealed. This time, the monster grabbed the man with both of its long claws and lifted him high up into the air. With what seemed like no effort, the thing grabbed his legs in one hand and his torso in the other and ripped him apart. Entrails and blood splattered all over the monster, showering it. With no hesitation, Thomas returned to his feet and began running once again. The church wasn't very far anymore. Looking around, Thomas could see that the once white snow was now stained a crimson red everywhere, as bodies upon bodies littered the ground. Smaller creatures gathered around each corpse, feeding their stomachs to the brim. Very few people remained in the outdoors anymore, each of them running with all their might towards their safe haven. In the far distance, he could see the large doors to the church slowly closing while more screams could be heard around him. He was so close to safety. That's when he felt sharp claws dig into his shoulder. He could hear the loud bang of the church doors as they finally closed. Warm crimson blood quickly dripped from the wounds on his shoulders onto the white snow. Thomas screamed at the top of his lungs as he was lifted high into the air, his gun and bag dropping to the ground. The large creature roared as it disappeared, with Thomas tight in its grip into the dark and cloudy sky, as silence fell upon the village once more.